Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
All right, hello and welcome to Precipice Fiction, the podcast where sometimes we feel like prose, and as you'll very much discover in this podcast, sometimes we feel like cons. Today with me, I have Burnham.
Hello, hello.
I have James Healy.
Hello.
And I have Paddy Boylan.
Hi.
Cool, and I'm Alex. What we wanted to talk about today was writer's block. Now, if you look online for quotes on writer's block, and I did because we're going to use one at the end, there are so many. I think there might be more writing on writer's block than almost any other topic that exists. And a lot of it is very dismissive. So not going to go down that road.
Dismissive?
Very dismissive. Yeah.
What, so like people saying like, oh, those who experience writer's block are pea brains and that's terrible.
They dismiss writer's block. Okay. That's good to know.
Yeah, just people saying like, just fucking write. Excuse me, I'll bleep that. But that's not the avenue I necessarily wanted to take today. I actually wanted to break it down into three different components, get really granular with it, and just go through those, I think, as we do. So I'll sort of summarize those. But first, what's everyone reading? Ali, what are you going through?
Oh, what I was going to bring to the table was a new anime that I've fallen down recently. I'm always on the lookout for new anime. I feel like I only find one good one a year because there's a lot of crap out there, and you just got to sift through it until you like stumble across one where you're like, this is amazing.
That's always been my issue with anime, is trying to find the ones that aren't like kind of terrible.
Yeah, and online like recommendations don't always check out either because everyone gets hyped for one. You watch it and you're like, this is
Looking
terrible.
at you, Craig.
Yeah, and your terrible anime taste. But when you do find a good anime, God, it's satisfying. Anyway, the one I've found at the moment is Spy Family or Spy X Family. It's not traditional shonen, and I've actually been trying to dissect what it is. It almost feels a little post-shonen. And I guess what I mean by that is it's happy to occupy several different genres at once, which is quite unusual for anime. Anime's always been quite solid in its four quadrants and never shall any of the four meet. But this one's quite happy to be slice of life family fun times with very cute characters who you invest in and care about. But it does have a lot of action drama tropes that are clearly wink wink nudge nudge the shonen wheelhouse. So I adore it because it's characters who shouldn't live together and are all disasters, but they're coming together and they're fixing each other, and it's so wholesome. And I'm in the middle of moving at the moment. It's really stressful, so the best part of my day is sitting down and watching this very wholesome anime. So that's why I would recommend it.
And shonen is high action, lots of fight scenes.
Shonen is the quadrant aimed at adolescent men, I guess. Okay. So the four quadrants are ages and genders. This is the young boys, high action. It's the one that's translated to the West the most because it's very similar to our superhero genre. It is the young male protagonist has superpowers and fights people and wins. It's that genre. But this one, so it wants to be action, spy, noir, fun times, but its actual structure is this slice of life. But how is the family at the end of the day going to like become a little bit closer after they've gone through this turmoil? And I'm like, it's really important that Anya does her homework. So it's just slightly different stakes than the actual shonen stakes. So that's what I love about it.
Cool. What about you, James?
I haven't really been reading or watching anything this week. We're doing a lot of editing. Could go on some short stories and editing and try to shop around in competitions. And
nice.
a couple of back started kind of editing the second draft of the novel I'm working on, which isn't to say I finished the first draft. I've just started looking back at the beginning and being like, I can make that nicer.
Yeah, I did that thing. We were talking about that the other day. Yeah, nice. What about you, Paddy?
Still reading Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel. That's great.
You were going to say Moby Dick for a second. It's like the return of the whale.
Decided to go back. Nah, I'm done with that. Although I do have some fun Herman Melville facts for later on regarding the theme. Yeah. I've also ordered off Amazon House of Leaves. I don't know who the author is. Yeah, I've heard so much about this book that it's a horror and it does really, really strange and interesting things with the fact that it's a book. Is that right, Alex, without giving too much away?
Yes, it does. It's definitely format based. I'll say that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, great read though. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
I think really.
I picked it up originally on PDF, and then I saw a discussion online saying like, don't read it in anything but a book. It has to be a book for the whatever is happening with it to work.
It's like a textbook.
Okay, I'm really excited. So that should be arriving soon.
It's really good.
And watching The Judge. Oh no, Your Honor, not The Judge. Have you?
Okay,
I don't know.
Cranston?
Yeah,
Good movie.
Yeah. How do you
haven't.
find it?
It's really good. It's really good. Bryan Cranston is just a treasure. I don't know how he's not much bigger than he is. Why did you watch it, Jips?
Yeah, I didn't like it.
Oh,
obviously, if you liked it, I didn't dig it.
this is the rule. This is the rule. Yeah, it's really good. Apparently, it's based on as American TVs want to do, based on an Israeli series. They, American series often take international things and make them American, but it's good. It's good. And that's me. That's my week.
Cool. And I have been hate reading a self-published horror book, which I won't mention.
What is hate reading?
It sold a lot of copies, right? I don't want to discuss who made it because I just don't want to down anyone. But it's just nice to read that and be like, wow, someone wrote this and a bunch of people read it. And I've just been doing that, and I've never done that before, but it's really fun. Just people getting murdered and then someone confessing their love directly after, and you're just like, where's the cause and effect? So anyway, that's just a little sadistic thing that I've been doing.
We have the term hate watching and/or popcorn throwing in our household, where we'll sit down and watch something we know is objectively bad, but say it's in the zeitgeist at the moment. So it's like, great, we're going to commit to this, and we just tear it apart as we watch it, like a running commentary between us. So that's how we cope with the terrible thing we've all decided to sit down and watch.
I think that was 60% of people that watched Morbius, right?
All 6 of them.
It's the sort of thing, well, it's the sort of thing that you just literally every 6 pages, I'll just go and just put it down. Like literally every 6 pages, I'll be like, come on. It's a lot of fun, actually. I'm really enjoying it just as an activity. So
need a live stream of you reading this book.
That's not a terrible idea. Actually, people do that. That's a TikToker thing for sure. People literally just reading, be like, oh, okay. Just no context.
Have you guys ever heard of lit RPG, literary RPG?
Yep.
I just discovered this subgenre. It's blending fantasy and a role-play game like you would play in a video game. So it's like, in Carnathax looked down and he was missing 3 hit points. That spider must have dealt more damage than he thought.
Wow.
Lucky he had 7 mana potions in his...
Oh.
I don't understand. I mean, if you're out there and you like lit RPG, then fantastic. And I'd like to know more about what the appeal is, and leave a comment. But I don't understand.
It does seem to be meshing the worst of both art forms. You don't get to play the RPG, and if it's writing, you don't get to just be in the moment.
And there's a guy reading, just doing the math as he goes. He's like, no, he didn't have that much mana. He hadn't earned that until the next... That'd be its own sort of hate read. That's hilarious. I'll bet there is something out there like that. I'll bet there's some good stuff of it out there, though. It sounds like it would be ripe for something interesting, but I can't think of how that would be formatted. But if you do find it, if anyone does format it, let us know, because I would actually like to read that too. With that, let's get into the topic of the day: writer's block. Now, this is a big topic. There's a lot of different forms of it. So I've actually chosen to break it down into 3 different things. Now, hopefully this will resonate with you guys, the way I've deconstructed it, but I guess we'll find out. I wanted to start really granular with what I'm going to call micro writer's block or word capacity, right? So of a session, how much can you write? And we'll get into that. The second one I wanted to talk about, and we'll double back and do these second 2, but I just wanted to let you know, is macro. And that's the more insidious one where you stop writing and then you find it difficult to go back writing within days or weeks or maybe even months, right? There's that's the one that I sometimes struggle with a little bit. But the real, like the big one that I actually don't have as much experience with, but I know is really, really tough, is the existential writer's block, where it's like, I can't start, I don't know what to do it, or I've literally put this manuscript down for years and I don't know how to do it. Like that big, like wide level, like this is just paralyzing to me. So we'll sort of delve into that. But let's get granular to start with. Like, so I have a fascination with finding out the rough word count of writers per day. I can tell you off the top of my head, Stephen King does about 2,000. I believe Brandon Sanderson does about 1,600, 1,500. I think Charles Dickens did around about 1,500 to 2,000. I've literally got books that, that got these. So that's a small obsession of mine. What do you guys find in terms of when you're writing? Where do you find your stopping points? Do you find they naturally occur at certain word count points? Do you find that you'll just get stopped at the end of a scene? Where is the point where you're like, that's all I got for at least this second?
Ooh, good question. I have some interesting data points because if I think back to last year when I was working full-time freelance, my hours were my own. So I could write based on stamina. So when basically the words stop, the mental exhaustion is how I would measure my daily output. And I would usually hit that 1,500. If I was on a roll, it would go to 2,000. Comparatively, when I've done writers' retreats to Varuna and where there's nothing distracting me and it's one project and I'm really in the zone, I know my biggest output, I've hit kind of 4K, 6K a day. That's like the marathon version of
That's
writing.
pretty good.
Yeah, I don't think I could sustain that on a long-term thing. That was just like, I have a week to write and nothing else. And that was kind of the output I was hitting. But my daily freelance routine was around that 1,500. It wasn't always naturally one scene. That always worked out to maybe I'd get halfway through a scene. But that's kind of when I felt my brain would start to go to mush a little bit. I would need to get up, go away from the computer, do something else. And that's where that was naturally sitting for me. And I knew not to push it. I could, but the quality wouldn't usually match. I could keep going, but I would just be producing another 1,000 words that were not as inspired. I wasn't enjoying the process. It was more of forcing it. These days, I work full time. So my writing time is getting up early of a morning and putting words down. So now I'm time-based, which is interesting because I always remember being interested in the people who would set timers for themselves and write to a time. And I'm like, that sounds not appealing. And then I had to become one of those people. And I don't mind it because then I kind of take the pressure off myself. I'm no longer watching my word count. It is just, this is the hour and a half, this is the 2 hours I have to dedicate to this. Let's just see what I can produce in this time. And I think when I was doing raw word counts, maybe I'd only get to about 1,000. So it was a little bit shorter. These days I'm working on screenplay, so I'm not counting by the word, but I do miss the old days of being able to go to writing until exhausted rather than, oh, it's hit 8:30, I've got to stop. But it's just a different way of thinking. It keeps me focused. I just do what I can in that time, and that's satisfying in its own way.
Yeah, I've always found that writing to a time has been not restrictive, but I find myself watching the clock if I'm watching
Right,
it,
yes.
and I'll be like, oh God. And that to a degree happens with word count as well. So
Yes.
these days, something I've been trying is literally just writing to a scene. And being like, well, look, when the scene gets done, and I don't, you can make an arbitrary stop mark to do that. I'll finish then. But what I usually tend to find myself is that I get this first little weird block at about 500 words, and I'm like, oh man, I feel like I need to take a break. And then I kind of, it's almost like a biomechanical thing. I push through it, and then I get to about 1300, 1500, and then I get that second block. And then usually at that point, if I keep going, I can keep going, and it'll almost that last, I don't know, maybe if I get to another 1,000 words, and which is a bit of a push, to be honest. But it will feel almost like it writes itself, like I've sort of hit that flow state. But it does take me about 1,500 words to get to it. Not that I always get that far, which is unfortunate, but there is really that sense of momentum at getting to that point. How about you, Paddy? What's your experience?
As you told us what this theme would be about, writer's block, I was thinking, I don't really experience writer's block. I don't know how much I have to contribute. But, you saying that writer's block can be just running out of steam, I absolutely experience that. I don't think I have a lot of writer's stamina. Like, if I push myself, I can do 2,000 words in a day, but it's a slog. It's a real marathon. I usually do like 500 words, and then, like you said, Ali, my brain has turned to mush. And then 500 words and my brain's turned to mush. And I need to do things in between. So if that turning to mush is like minor writer's block, then yeah, I totally get it. I really have to pace myself. And isn't it weird how something like writing can be exhausting? I don't know what's going on there, because you're sitting in a chair, like putting words down. But apparently it's incredibly draining.
Yeah, like you'd feel like people do 8-hour days or 10-hour days sometimes in front of the computer, and you feel like you should be able to do that.
You should, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's not. You can't do it really.
No, and it's bizarre. Yeah, so I usually, 1,000 words is good for me, and if I can get to 2,000, then great.
Yeah, no, that's interesting comparatively. Like, I feel like if I dedicate 2 hours to writing and the amount of work my brain does, that will still feel like the most productive part of my day. I then will go and work a full day at work. So I'm 6 hours in front of a computer doing other tasks, but I'm not as activated. That's not as satisfying. That doesn't feel like I've done, quote unquote, as hard work.
Yeah, working for other people sucks. I think there's a part of us just rebels against it, right?
Oh, it's just not that satisfying, like high-powered thinking. And you're just like, wow, at the end of that, I really achieved something. I was working hard. So it's just, you're in a different gear than when you're in the lower gear, even though you're there longer.
It's worth bearing in mind as well that the brain actually uses more energy. It's like generating more electricity physically than any other part of the body. So in a sense, you are actually using up more energy. I don't know how to quantify that, though. I'm sorry. Someone's going to go into the comments like, that is a patent lie. Alex is an idiot. But no, it does use up a lot of juice from what I've heard.
I've been kind of writing with time constraints at the moment, just because I'm working and then I'm doing stuff in the evening. So my writing space is kind of just in between work and whatever I have on that evening. And I tend to have almost no energy as well at that point. But I've been writing in the emails and then just emailing it to myself. So when I get home, I just transfer it over into like the documents that the story is in. And because I've been working on the same thing for so long, I have a very consistent about 900, 1,200 a day word count. But that is I can't see what the word count is when I'm writing it. So I don't know until I get home what it actually was. But I do the same thing where I kind of pick a moment, or I pick a scene, or it's just kind of something in the scene where I'm like, right, I know this is the conflict, so I'll just write that. And I kind of just write it until I feel like it's lost its energy, or I've come to kind of a natural point where now I have to move on to the next thing. And then I kind of stop, send the email, get home, and I'm like, oh, cool, okay, it was literally about 900, 1,200 every time. So I know that when I go back and start editing that, not every one of those scenes can be the same consistent length. So there'll be a lot to chop or add. But yeah, that's kind of how it's been going at the moment. Now that I'm going back and doing the second draft, because I've been looking at because I'm pushing out 1,000 words and just trying to hit that point. I feel like the content hasn't been as strong as it could have been. So I'm going back and looking at the second draft and trying to do it in 500 word bursts, but dividing it up during the day. If I sit down to write 1,000 words, I'm like, right, just get the 1,000 words down. But if I'm sitting down to write 500 words, I want to make it really, really good. And I feel like I have the time to do that. So I think if I just divide it into 2 writing bursts a day, that'll have the same speed, but with better words, basically.
The quality, yeah.
Just as a minor tangent, Alex, I'm now listening to James talk and listening to yourself talk. I'm wondering if writer's block hits plotters and pantsers slightly differently. Because I know I've only discovered this very recently about myself working on the screenplay, that I will hit a wall and get a very typical sense of writer's block where the white page is staring at me, if even though I've got a plan and I'm trying to force the scene and it's not working, I've recently identified that means there's a problem with my plan. It's because I've sat down, I've looked at my plan for the day, I'm going to start writing, and I'm like, oh, why is it really hard to get into gear? Why is it really hard to get the words down? And I realized it's not a problem with my muscles. It's something innate is telling me that I'm unsatisfied with what I've plotted and the direction that the thing I've told myself to write is not correct. So when I hit that wall, I now know it's step away from the blank page, go back to my plan, fiddle with my plan. Once I'm happy with it and I solve whatever was stopping me, then suddenly I can go back to the white page and the words flow again. So that's actually like a discovery only of the last 2 months, that I'm like, oh, that feeling is a problem with my plan. And so that was an exciting discovery. So now I know how to solve that.
You don't feel it's ever just not being in the zone, just not being in the writerly space?
First, I've trained myself, and I think I've talked about this in my creativity episode, that I have little tricks and tips about how to get myself in the right thinking. I know how to get my muscles warm, and I've been doing it long enough that I know I can reliably get myself into, quote unquote, the zone to feel energized to be able to write. So this was something new. This was something else stopping me. It wasn't that, oh, I just don't feel like writing, my brain's not there, the words aren't coming today. It was something else that was jamming, like something else was putting on the brakes. So it was nice that I had to look somewhere else, being like, okay, what's wrong? Because I know I can sit down, I know I can usually get the juices flowing, but this story is just not working. And then I'm like, well, it is literally, the story's not working. It's my outline that's the problem, not so much the finger punching bit.
That's probably a good segue, actually, not to be too arbitrary about it, but that kind of is essentially what I'm talking about in the main, about this second form of writer's block, this sense of like, this is what I think of as the most typical sort of writer's block. When you get to the computer and you go, I don't know what to write. I don't know how to move forward with this. And I'm going to call that macro writer's block. Okay. So the idea that when you sit down, you're just like, where is this going? What am I doing? And like you said, this is going to hit plotters like you, and pantsers like me and James too. And I guess you're a plotter as well, Paddy. Yeah. It's going to hit us quite differently. So I find this one to be the most insidious. And as you said, one version of that is just having the plan being wrong. Like, so I can remember writing my first book. No, actually, the second one I wrote, but neither of them are out, so whatever. Where there's a character in one of them that dies. And I wrote a whole big chunk of the book going forward before I realized, no, the wrong character died. And in retrospect, that character shouldn't have even been in the book.
The pantsers dilemma, right? This is my fear of pantsing, actually, is getting 90% of the way of normal going, oh God, oh no.
That is horrifying.
Here's the thing. The book will tell you straight away, like, something's not working here. And you can like hoe through it and do another, I think I got another 7,000 words, but it was just agony. I was just like, I felt like I had iron rods on my fingers trying to, so there is that. I think that's a big part of it. Another aspect to that would sort of be the rusting of the pipes, where you sit, you stop doing it for a couple of days and then you come back and, well, that's the thing. You don't even come back. I think that's the big thing. You're just like, oh, I got to get back to it. And then you're kind of like, I got other stuff to do. And before you know it, like a couple of weeks have gone past and you haven't written. And I think that's the most insidious thing. And I've trained myself to be able to go like, no, just break that habit. Just sit down and write something. It'll probably be crap for the first, 500 words, but that's okay. Mm-hmm. How have you guys experienced that second level, that second gear of writer's block? Does that make sense, that differentiation?
Yeah, I think that's exactly how I was trying to answer Paddy's question about is it that other kind of just being out of practice writer's block? And it's the metaphor I like to think of it is lifting weights. Like if you're lifting weights routinely, your muscles get stronger, it gets easier, you can lift that weight, you can start lifting heavier weight. But even if you take a week off and then you go to lift that same weight, you can't do it. Your muscles have atrophied. It is suddenly harder. And that's exactly what's sitting down at the keyboard and being like, all right, I'm going to get into writing zone. And if you've taken a week off, it's like, why is this arduous? Why is this hard? And it is hard. I haven't been first drafting prose for a while, and I'm like aware that when I try to do it in January, it's going to be a challenge, but I'm aware that's coming. I'm used to that feeling. I know what that kind of writer's block feels like, so I can prepare myself for it and know how to tackle it.
I relate to that, what you just said there, Ali. When I kind of started writing first drafting again earlier on this year, I just felt like I had no idea how to like dive in, even to a short story or to kind of this longer project. The longer project was very daunting because I couldn't even sit down and write a short story. So I kind of had to find little strange, almost entry points to kind of pierce into the story where I was like, oh, I'm really interested in this. And I know it's not the beginning of the story. I know it's probably not the best place to start, but that is the thing that I feel like I can sit down and write right away and then try to build the rest of the story around that. It might be a little trick for that type of writer's block. When you're just kind of out of practice. But then also the thing that you were saying, Alex, about, just feeling like it's not working or maybe feeling like you just don't know how to proceed while you're still in a project. I'm glad I mentioned it because that's definitely why I've gone back and started the second draft of this novel now. It's because I have about a dozen scenes like that I've just passed over. And I've tried them a few different ways. And even when I'm stuck, I'm like, right, I don't know how to do this. So I'm just going to write the beats. And then at least I've got the structure of the scene down. I can come back and fill it in later if I'm feeling like I have a clearer picture of what it should be or have more energy. But for a bunch of these scenes, I've just gone, no. I don't really know what's meant to happen here. I was going to skip this. I know what's meant to be on the other side of it, and I'll just proceed. So now I'm wondering if I've really like hamstrung myself when I go back now to the second draft. If I've just got a bunch of scenes that need to be completely reworked and change the story moving forward. I'm hoping I might fill in stuff about the characters and stuff about the world so that when I get to those points, I'll have a clearer picture of what should happen there. That's what I hope.
It's a Stephen King that sometimes he just envisions like a certain particular scene and then writes a whole book around trying to put that scene into a story. Do I have that right? Looking at you, Alex, the one who knows all about Stephen King.
The Stephen King archivist.
Yeah, I might be thinking with someone else. I don't know, but
I think that's no. I don't know if that's him. I'm sure he's done that. I'm sure he has approached it like that. But I think it's usually like no. Actually, you're right. He said that about The Shining. Like he imagined like just Danny walking down and being chased by a fire hydrant, and then wrote the whole thing about that. But there was a whole lot of sort of like he was in the hotel, and there was a whole lot of inspiration around it. But yeah, essentially, I'm glad. You brought up the skipping scenes thing there, James, because I think that's super important and something I just forget to do sometimes. Like I'll just be like, I have one of those very obsessive compulsive brains where I'm like, no, I have to finish it. I can't just skip it. Like I can't just get over it. So I have to make myself sometimes go like, okay, look, this, for whatever reason, this isn't working. Maybe just put it down, come back to it later. And then sometimes I'll forget about it and send out a draft, and someone will be like, so this scene finishes on an and. What, like,
I find that so fascinating. I've heard of these amazing people that have the ability to skip scenes and come back to them later. I can't think of anything more terrifying. I feel like I have to write chronologically. There's something about trying to comb my voice or finding the story that I have to do in a certain order, that if I skip a scene, I'm not going to go, I don't know if I'll be able to come back and access it, or the voice will suddenly not match if I try to do that, or it feels like letting myself off the hook a little bit. Like if I get up to a sequence and I'm tempted to skip it because I'm like, I can picture the next scene far more clearly. It's ready to go. I put the brakes on myself and I'm like, no, do the hard work, Ali. You got to write this, otherwise you'll never write it.
The way I see it, I think I am inclined to write scenes, is that if I have, like, let's say 5 really strong ideas for scenes in a story, I know that I can write those vividly and immediately because I've got the idea. Once I've done that, the really hard work of writing the stuff that's, I don't know how to write this, I know what I'm going to do, kind of evaporates a little because I've already got those linchpins of the story, and then the rest is filling in details. So that just seems, I don't know, the easier way to do it to me. Maybe easier isn't good, I don't know, but that's how I work. It's
funny you described it as letting yourself off the hook, Ali, because I feel like it's a lot more like walling myself in. Because I'm like, I know on the other side of this scene, or like a character needs to be dead, and then this character needs to be in possession of this thing. Well, I don't know how that's going to happen, so I'm just going to push ahead. And now I'm left with this chunk in the middle of the story where I'm like, I'm really committed now to the fact that on the far side of that scene, things are very different. Wow. I think some of my best stuff, or some of my worst stuff, has come out of being trapped in that way, where I just had to figure out a way to make it work, and work with what I have, maybe put into the world and put into the scene to get them to that point. Like,
so you need to work from a point of low-key terror in order to navigate your way out. Yeah, okay.
I really do need to put the cart before the horse and then just make it work.
The only way I can, so say if I have a very vivid climax and I'm in murky waters before getting there, I won't let myself skip to the vivid climax, because one, I'm reassured it's there when I get there. I'm not going to forget it. I know it well, but it needs to be the shiny thing on the horizon that's going to get me through the crap bit in the middle. I can't quite envision yet, because I'm like, look, this is going to be hard now, but then woohoo, how good is it going to feel when I can get to the bit I can imagine really, really clearly? So it's my own personal motivator a little bit. I reckon if I just jumped from shiny bit to shiny bit, I would never write a functional story, because I'd never be inclined to go back and write the in-betweenies bits.
See, it's funny because I find the big scenes that I theoretically know about, like, I find them terrifying to write, because I'm like, I know how this is meant to go. If this isn't as good as I thought it was in my brain, I'm screwed. I find oftentimes I'll find the best scenes just the little weird in between bits that just pop up. Like there was this one in the very first thing I wrote, the very first book.
Was that Challenger?
Yeah, Challenger.
Yeah.
Where it's just literally a scene about like an older brother like explaining why you need to lock the bathroom door instead of like just yelling at people if they bust in. Like that's it. And it's like one of my favorite scenes in the book.
It was a really good scene.
It just encapsulates a lot. But that was just like, oh, I guess this is an interlude now. Like, whereas some of the biggest scenes that I had planned out, you start writing them and you go like, oh, this isn't going the way I thought at all.
Yeah.
Which is maybe indicative of my whole writing process. With that, I suppose, and I honestly, I don't know that any of us are really qualified to speak on this. I think I have an idea about it, but the big one, this is more for people listening who are like, look, I really want to write, but I just can't get started. I can't seem to do it. I can't, I can't figure out where to jump into it. And maybe you guys have had some experience with it. I've always felt that, not to be pretentious, but I don't really think of myself as a writer so much. I was always a musician. So I very much experienced that sense of, but what if it's not good enough with music stuff? But because I came to writing later, it's this secondary thing where I'm like, well, I just do this. Like, this is something I do. It's not something I am. Right. And I'll kind of, so I'm okay with just writing crap, I guess, and then just fixing it later. Whereas with music, I'm like, oh no, if this isn't working out now, I just have to scrap it. But yeah, do any of you guys have any experience with that? Like, just the act of it itself is so terrifying that you couldn't do it. Did you ever have a period where you're like, I don't know how to get into this, or I don't know how to access this?
I'm potentially suffering from this a little bit with my historical fiction in the pointy end editing. So it's not so much writer's block with my first drafts. It's coming later when I'm trying to hold it to a really high standard and I'm kind of petrified I can't get it there. And then that's stopping me from going back and even trying, which is unfortunate. I know I will, but it's a very scary thing. I'm like, when I go back and like, I know where I want it to be, and I'm questioning whether or not I am the person to get it there, which is silly. You do this for years and years, and you do it again and again, and you're used to it coming, and you're like, look, you just got to go through the motions, and you can do it. But every project seems to have its own moment of doubt. Even my screenplay at the moment, I'm like 5 pages from the end. No joke, I'm so close, but this has been a redraft that's almost been a 6 months in the making. It's a marathon, and there were points along the way I'm writing it and I'm like, yeah, this is shit hot, I'm so good, I'm doing this, and then now I'm at the end and I'm reflecting back and I'm like, what have I spent 6 months doing? I'm pretty sure this is nonsense and terrible. So just it's pendulum between, I guess it's more self-doubt is what we're talking about, this existential, it's me and my value and my sense of whether or not I could do it that cripples my ability to go back in. It doesn't affect my first drafting, like you said, Alex, because I am at peace with creating crap in the first draft, but both my historical fiction and this screenplay are pointy end drafts, and that's when the doubt creeps in, because I'm like, it should be done now, it should be good now, why isn't it good yet? And that's when it gets slow and hard.
Yeah, and that's a good I'll just make a little point here. That's a good thing to think of in terms of that abyss in especially writing a novel, like, because there is, I don't know if you guys have experienced, I certainly have, there's this lull usually in the middle of a novel where you're like, oh, this is getting really difficult, and like, and I heard a story of Neil Gaiman where he was trudging through, I think it was what's the big one, American Gods, I think it was American Gods, and he was talking to his agent and he was like, look, I'm slogging through this, I'm just writing it, I've gotten to this midpoint, nothing's happening, it's just all a mess, and like, I just don't know if I can do this bit. And she just like pauses for a second and goes, oh, good, you're up to that bit. Like, it's just something that I think every writer goes through to some point. There's just this slog in the middle, like the pit of despair, I call it, which is just this point of like, oh man, am I any good? Is this any good? Should I bother with this? Should I continue with this? And the answer is always yes. Just keep going. Just keep going, at least till you get past that bit, you know? If you get into a point where you're in a flow again and then you want to stop, then you can stop, but you always will get out of that point.
I was going to jump in and say that that's exactly the same as both of you, that it's more of an editing thing than a first draft thing. I think just from like training and doing competitions and stuff, so I know that if I don't feel like doing something, it doesn't matter, I still have to go in and do it, even if I'm not feeling up to scratch, or if I have an injury or something, I know I have to get in and do it anyway. So first drafting is fine. I'll just say, right, it's just going to suck today and we're just going to do it. And the next day it's better. It's more of an editing thing when I feel like I've put so much time into something and I'm like, I don't know what to change. I don't know what the direction this needs to go. I don't know what it's missing. And it seems like just a paralyzing doubt just starts to like creep in and prevent me working on a project, and the idea of like picking up something new and working on that instead becomes really, really attractive. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it.
I think there's a lot to be said for giving yourself permission to suck, right? Just saying, yeah, it's okay if what I write actually isn't good today, or even if this book is bad. And Alex, that's something you're really good at.
That's different when it's a first draft or when it's something you've put hundreds of hours into editing, because at that point you feel like you're almost very high up on a tight wire and you're like, oh, if I edit it this way, I'm going this way, and if I edit it that way, I'm going that way, and I'm kind of committed from that point.
And there's the Alex school of thought where it's like, you know what, that's okay, you just go to the next one, go to the next one, go to the next one.
Yeah,
Alex, I need a picture of your face on my wall, and every time I need that, I just look up at your
take a screenshot.
Your face.
No, I really like what James was saying about when it gets really tough, in the pointy end editing, that is when we're most tempted to then go, oh, a new shiny, and jump onto a new project. And it's sometimes embracing that, because one, it's fun. That's when writing's at its most fun, when you're kind of like, oh, new shiny, you want to jump on, you want to do the new writing.
It's from work.
You're motivated. But it's also fighting that a little bit, because you've sunk so many hours into the big thing, the thing that's probably been consuming you for years at this point. And I know the juggle of being like, look, I can just spend one more draft might get it there, or like just to justify how much time you've spent on it. And then otherwise you're also weighing that against, or am I just doing the same thing at infinite, and this is madness and I'll never fix this? And I think that's a really relatable juggle for a lot of people. That's the trunk novel, right? You're like, am I ever going to get this to the point where I'm satisfied with it? Maybe. So just on a small tangent, I like thinking of it as two different streams. There's your craft stream and there's your taste stream. And your craft is, you're always skilling up. Each time you come back to a new draft, you're a better writer because you've done more writing. You're just more practice in it. You don't make the same mistakes you made the last time. So your craft is always improving. But then your taste also changes. And just by what you consume, the more books you read, whatever movies you're watching at the time is going to keep honing and changing your taste. Even as you get older as a person, you have different values, different experiences. So your taste is changing as well. And sometimes these things aren't always going to match or be in sync with the project you're working on at the time.
Yeah.
We talked about this a little bit in our When is a Project Finished podcast, but this idea that the project may never feel finished because either your craft is always changing or your taste is always changing, and it's where your current project falls at that intersection. Anyway, that is another thing that causes writer's block for me, in conclusion.
I think also there's a lot to be said for the taking a break method that you were saying, because it is always tempting to follow that shiny object syndrome. And James and I have had a very similar experience with this. Like, sometimes you write half a book and you're like, this is too much. I need to sit down and do something else, or just like need to take a break. I need to take a couple of weeks off this. So, go write a short story or a novella or something and then come back to it. And I found I've had like a 6-month interval between doing something, but I knew that I would come back to it. So having that faith that I could do it allowed me to put it down and come back to it. The other version of that is writing, and I do this much more often, is writing the whole book, and then like just dashing off some crappy ending and being like, whatever, it's close enough, and then putting it down, not coming back to it for a couple of weeks, and then filling in the blanks, right? And this is something me and James were talking about recently. And I find that to be very effective, especially if you get some time where you can sit back and go, there is that plot hole there. Oh, okay. No, it was the mother the whole time. All right, no, I got it now. And you just you just fill that in there. So that's another, yeah. So I don't think there's anything, as long as you know you'll come back to it, I don't think there's anything wrong with just going like, I'm done for now. I just want to put this down and come back to it.
Yeah, and I know that's something you've talked about as well, Ali, is just having like time away from the project, that maybe if you're not doing writing for 4 days, that you're still thinking about it, it's still hot in your thoughts, and you kind of figure out, oh, you know what, I needed to do this here, or I needed to make that work, or maybe this is the way the relationship changes and stuff. So yeah, sometimes part of the cure is actually distance.
The break. Yeah.
So yeah, I got that a lot.
Paddy, you said you had some hot knowledge to drop on us.
I did, in the half hour of cramming before this episode, because like I said, I feel myself pretty blessed to not experience writer's block very much. If I want to sit down and write, I can just sit down and write. And I kind of put that down to having a very strong inner, what's the word? The inner voice that's kind of dictating. I experience that very strongly. And he just seems to want to turn up on command, which is great. But reading around about this, there has been obviously a lot of different thinking about writer's block, and writer's block is something that's been experienced as long as people have been writing stuff. And what I thought was really interesting is the pre-psychological diagnosis of why people get writer's block. Because writing was always thought to be a thing of divine inspiration, right? There's something outside of you that is informing what you're writing. You've got a muse, or it's God, which always feels a little self-aggrandizing, but there you go, or an angel or a spirit. And often it was thought that when you have writer's block, it's because that divine inspiration has abandoned you. That seems really terrifying. The fact that your creativity doesn't come from in you, it comes from outside. And once that's gone, like, no, that's it. You're done. I could see a lot of writers just abandoning their work if they thought that whatever creative muse are just like, see you later. I'm on to the next person.
That is horrifying what you've articulated, because I feel like all the solutions we've discussed today are because we inherently know, look, the brain is just an organ that sometimes gets tired. We are sacks of meat and hormones, and sometimes we can't function, and we're at peace with that. And that's what that's what we use to soothe ourselves, to know we can come back and be creative next time. But yeah, pre that kind of thinking, what you're saying, Paddy, if you always thought it was an external thing, you'd be like, what God did I piss off? What rock did I step on? What stream did I piss in that sent the muses to flee from me? That sounds awful.
It really would be.
I was going to say, believe it or not, I have a quote from a certain writer who's written many books, often in the horror genre. I don't know if you guys have heard of his name is Stephen King. It's not like we mentioned his name twice or three times an episode. Yeah, and he's just a, Anyway, he likes to take the. I really, really like his approach to things. He's got two different philosophies, but I'll talk about the one that sort of most approaches this. So he says, like, look, there's a little guy I call the Muse, and I'll go down and work in my little basement, my cellar, and I'll write, and sometimes he won't show up, but if I keep going and keep turning up, eventually he'll be like, all right, kid, you're putting in the work. And like, I'm gonna sprinkle some fairy dust on you. So it's this combination of an external force and an internal thing. It's like, hey, I'm doing my end of the bargain. Eventually this other thing is going to show up. And I actually think that's the best of both worlds, because I find the idea, I don't know whether or not it's true, but I find the idea of inspiration coming externally to be actually quite liberating, because then you don't have to stress about like, I'm not this genius of, it's just like, well, the spirits weren't with you today, and that's okay. So it's like that dual thing of like, look, I'm going to show up and do my bit. If you want to show up and bless me with some divine inspiration, that's great, but I'm going to be here anyway. I really like that approach, because it feels like it's the best of both of those options.
The personification of the internal allows you to blame something external when it's not working for you. So I guess that's the comforting version.
To that, there is an author called Elizabeth Gilbert, who I think she wrote like an essay or something on her own writing experience. And she said that some of the pressure of writer's block might be able to be relieved by interpreting creative writers as having genius rather than being genius. If you think you are genius, then of course, once it leaves you, you start like, oh God, what's wrong with me? What am I doing wrong? But if you just interpret creativity as having genius, of course it's going to come and go. Of course, sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. So I think there is totally something to, once the locus of creativity is outside of yourself, you don't have that amazing pressure to perform.
The muses, she's fickle. They are fickle.
I think a lot of writer's block might be pressure to perform and putting your own work up on a pedestal. If I can hit you guys with a few more little points that I discovered just earlier. Okay. So the condition of writer's block was first described in 1947 by the Austrian, it's always Austrian, psychoanalyst Erman Bergler, who described it as being caused by, quote, oral masochism, mothers that bottle fed, and an unstable private love life. So that's what's wrong with y'all.
Sounds legit. Sounds legit.
It's your oral masochism. Oral masochism? I don't know what he meant by that.
Fed.
Yeah. Herman
What was the last
Melville.
one? What is stable? love life?
Okay, so it was oral masochism, mothers that bottle fed, and having an unstable private love life. So
Sorry, bottle babies, you're out. No, yep.
I mean, the last one checks out, but the other two are questionable.
it could check out, I guess.
I don't know. There's a lot of crazy writers out there who have not the most stable love lives. I actually really recommend this book called I think it's let me find it. I think it's Creative Rituals. I'm actually going to find it here. I'll let you guys know later. But it basically describes the rituals of not just writers but creative people. And I don't know if you're a nerd for process like I am, you'll just love. I've read through this. It's like 7 hours of just like, yeah, then he got up and then he used to go for a walk and sometimes he ate porridge and then he was a real dick to his wife and then he went to bed. Like it's literally
Being a
like
dick to your wife is part of the ritual.
100%.
So it's like, why are you such a dick to your wife? Well, I have to be. That's otherwise I can't write.
Some of them honestly quote that. It's insane. It's absolutely insane, but it's so interesting to read. So like not everyone, but like anyway, I'll
I love this data collection being like 4 out of 5 famous writers were dicks to their wives. Therefore, inherently, that's an important ingredient to being a successful writer.
Correlation is definitely causation.
Yeah.
Definitely.
More scientific method.
I think we have Writer's Rituals as one of the episodes on our big list. Peek Behind the Curtain, we have a big list of episode ideas. So Alex, break that out when we do that. That could be really interesting.
This book is gold. I'm trying to find exactly what it is now, but it is absolute gold. I just had so much fun with it. I can't find it now, but I'll dig it out so we can have a look at it. Cool.
I'm nearly done. Alex, I have more.
No, go on, Paddy. Sorry, I just because I don't have anything to say.
I have more points, Alex, to continue the eternal Moby Dick references that have become kind of a hallmark of the show. Herman Melville, who wrote Moby Dick, he had writer's block so bad that a few years after writing Moby Dick, he actually stopped writing. He completely stopped. Yeah. He got in his own head so badly that he thought, I can't do this anymore.
That's the same as To Kill a Mockingbird, Harper Lee. Isn't that her story as well?
She was a first-time writer as well, right?
Yeah, just something about the crippling success of the first novel. What that's done to some writers is, time and time again, they can't live up. If it's a runaway success, that first one, that's what does it.
Funnily enough, Moby Dick was not actually much of a success. It was a reasonable success, but it was nowhere near what it was. It also wasn't his first, so it's interesting that's the one that really. So he didn't write anything after that, or?
I'm just going off what I saw on this Wikipedia page, to be honest. But apparently, quote, he quit writing novels a few years after having written Moby Dick, and I can't help but think that's because Moby Dick is such a staggering work of genius that you've always got that really, really high pedestal in front of you.
Yeah.
As a modern example, I'm wondering if that's what's going on with George R. R. Martin a little bit, and potentially even Patrick Rothfuss. I think they're all a little bit. Their series got too big and famous before they finished the series.
Not Patrick Rothfuss. I really need that last book.
You might be waiting a while, Paddy.
With George, that's so tough because you know that's his opus. That he knows that he's old enough that's the last really, that's going to be his masterpiece, and that must just be like an absolute sword of Damocles just above him. Like he's just like, how do I round this out? You know, I mean, look, if it's any consolation to you, George, because I know you're listening, it can't be worse than the TV show, right? Like at least you've got that.
The death threats on Twitter will stop.
Oh, that must just be absolutely crippling, you know?
Yeah.
And I know that he is, because he's said himself that he is a writer who, even at this stage in his career, like wakes up in the morning and just feels like he's shit at writing and can't write.
Crazy.
That's really grounding, actually, to even like a master like George R. R. Martin experiences writing block like that. It's kind of humbling.
Yeah.
One more point. One more nugget of research.
You can keep going.
No, just one more. Just one more. Quote, under stress, a human brain will shift control from the cerebral cortex to the limbic system. The limbic system is associated with the instinctual process, such as fight or flight response.
Lizard brain.
I interpreted that as once you are under stress, you shift into a different gear where you are concerned with big fears and big problems in front of you, which sounds like it matches the experience of writer's block. You go from free-flowing, unblocked creativity to you only fixate on the fact that you can't write. It's all-consuming notion that, oh God, I can't write, no ideas are coming to me, and that becomes like right at the forefront of your brain. So yeah, do with that what you will.
I hate how much sense that makes. I don't know how much we want to talk about it, but I even know when I've changed medications for various things, it changes obviously my hormones, my chemistry, and that affects my motivation to write or how easy it is to write. So again, constantly reminding myself that I am just a sack of meat trying to do this thinking thing, that when something like that is such an external or a body chemistry thing changes, it changes my writing. And I have talked to some friends as well who are writers who suffer, they're kind of more on the manic depressive spectrum. And I know throughout history it's well documented that creatives are like, look, this is bad, I would like to medicate this. But then they worry that a lot of their creativity and their voice comes from the fact that they're on the manic depressive spectrum. So that they worry that their writing or their voice would change when they go on medication. And it's, I've been talking to friends about it. I can read about all the great classic writers who have done it with this. I'm trying to think of some. What's his name? Jump in if you guys might have to edit this. I can't remember their names, but there are plenty examples of writers who, never medicated themselves because they were worried about this exact thing.
I wonder also about writers that self-medicate with drugs or alcohol, and to what extent they're like, if I don't do cocaine every day, I won't be able to write. So now I'm kind of stuck.
Yeah. Guess who experienced that?
Starts with an S, ends with a K.
Hosting. Sorry, James, go on.
I didn't know how much we wanted to touch on mental health and stuff, but I spoke with a friend of mine as well who writes poetry, and we're both talking about kind of the ebb and flow of our mental health, and we're saying that sometimes when you're feeling great, you don't necessarily feel like writing, or when you do sit down and feel like writing, it feels a little flat, or it feels like it's missing something. And then maybe when your mental health isn't as good, writing could be a bit of an escape or a little bit of an expression of things, and it feels like what you're working on is so much better. So we're kind of saying it's almost this twisted give and take thing where you want your mental health to be good, but then you feel like your artistic side really suffers, and you don't want to let your mental health fall apart, but you almost also notice an improvement in your kind of artistic life. So kind of a delicate, unfortunate balance there.
That'd be an awful trap to be in.
Back to how success can sometimes cripple, or how good times might sometimes cripple. I think off the back of some rejections is when I felt most motivated to go in and edit and write. And I've got some characters that have axes to grind, and I find them very easy to access as protagonists off the back of a rejection. While at the moment I might personally feel like in a slump because I've had some two kind of big wins recently. I received a reward and we've published the new mythic.
Available now on Amazon.
So that's worth celebrating, but at the same time, it's shit for my motivation.
Yeah, you can kind of coast a bit, huh? You can rest on your laurels a little bit. You're just like, just put a book out. It's fine, Yeah. Paperback and ebook, by the way, just saying.
I've noticed at times when there was a lot of stress in my life and I really needed to focus on something or buckle down and work on something, my writing has been great. I'm I know I really need to deal with this thing right now, or I could just sit for 3 hours and write about made-up characters.
I'm exactly the opposite. Actually, stress completely kills my creative flow. I can't do it. Even a little bit of stress. In fact, the better my mental health is, the better I write.
Wow, okay. I think writing for me definitely started as an avoidance thing. So
I feel like we're on danger of ending on a bad moral here, but also similar to Paddy, though, I need routine and stability to feel like I can write, because I'm moving house at the moment. People on YouTube can see the empty new room behind me, and this has killed my writing routine, and that is causing an extra stress. That's almost more stressful than the act of moving, is how much it's disrupted my writing routine, which then is this vicious cycle of it paralyzing my writing further. So I'm also a very big advocate of patterns, routine, daily writing habits. The brain loves habits. So if you can give it every 7 a.m. you're going to be writing, the brain is like, it's going to show up on time. It's going to remember that. It loves that pattern. It'll do that pattern. Or if you're not thinking about your brain, if you would rather think about it as an external muse, tell your external muse that it's going to show up at 8 a.m. every day, and it will.
Yeah. Does anyone else also find that when they're not writing, they're like a worse person? Like,
yes.
if I'm not being creative, I'm objectively more irritable and more reactionary and more prone to just
no, we were joking about this the other day, Alex, but 100% I am more irritable if I don't write that morning. I am a worse person at work because then I resent work because I'm like, I should be at home writing because I didn't write this morning. I make my life living hell for my partner and housemate because I'm not writing. It just, I am a worse person if I don't get that little out. It doesn't need to be much. It just needs to be my hour in the morning. But if I don't get it, it sets me on the wrong foot for the rest of the day.
Do you guys, you might have different answers, think that it's because the writing is a creative, emotional outlet, or because if you don't write, you're conscious of the fact that you should have written and you should have been writing?
I think it's both. It's both, actually. I actually think the first reason is a knock on to the second. Like, the reason why you feel like, oh, I didn't get any words in today is because you remember that time when you wrote and you felt good and you felt good having written it. And that's set up this, it's almost an associative thing. But there is definitely the like, oh, I'm closer to my goal aspect that humans just love, that little like the next tick box on there. So I think it's both.
I like to think it's the logical one, but I'm wondering if there is an id part of me that is just like a toddler that kicks and screams because it didn't get the serotonin fix that it was promised and is used to getting.
Yeah, but it's a toddler that can write, so there's a silver lining.
It's all about chaining up our inner toddlers and trying to make a career off them.
Make more word spaghetti, baby writer.
That's the quote. That's the quote of the podcast. There it is. There it is. Chain up your inner toddler.
Speaking of that, if we don't have anything further to go on, I actually, because there's so many quotes on writing, I just had to do a couple of them, and honestly, some of them are just super mean, and I just want to read them out. Okay, so I got a couple. This one's from Neil Strauss, who you guys might know as the guy who wrote the game. He's wrote a lot of stuff as well, but that's his, he's done a lot of rockstar biographies and stuff as well. Writer's block is almost like the equivalent of impotence. It's performance pressure you put on yourself that keeps you from doing something you should naturally be able to do. The reason you don't get writer's block as a writer is because you have a deadline. It has to be in. You have no choice. But if you sit there and you think, this piece has to be the ultimate article, the ultimate book ever written, my entire selfish being wrapped up in this, and this is me, the bigger of a story you would make up about what you're doing, the bigger the block will get. It has nothing to do with the talent of writing or the skill of writing. It's completely performance anxiety. So that's one interpretation.
Well, I would have expected him to conceptualize that.
Oh yeah. I can understand. I can see the A to B.
I can see that's where his mind went right away.
Yeah, he's using the royal second person. So when writers self-aggrandize and they're like, "This is how it is for everyone," it's like, well, no, you've shared your experience, so we can see that. But
yeah, well, I guess that's a pickup artist in LA for you. The second one is, I haven't had writer's block. I think it's because my writing process involves writing very badly. I actually love that. That is one
that
version
is good.
Okay. Well, that was Jennifer Egan, who I've actually never heard of. Then there's another one. I don't believe in writer's block. I try and deal with getting stuck by having more than one thing to work on at a time, and by knowing that even 100 bad words that didn't exist before is forward progress. And that lovely little quote is Neil Gaiman.
Always good things to say.
Yeah. And then the last one, there's one by Jerry Seinfeld where he's like, writer's block isn't a thing. You suck. Get back to writing. I don't even want to quote that because it's just so mean. But then the last one is, give yourself permission to write a bad book. Writer's block is another name for writer's dread, the paralyzing fear that our work won't measure up. It doesn't matter how many books I've published. Starting the next one always feels as daunting as the first. A day comes when I just have to make a deal with myself, write something anyway, even if it's awful. Nobody has to know. Maybe it never leaves this room. Just go. And that is by Barbara Kingsolver, who did the, not the Poisonwood Bible. I think it is the Poisonwood Bible, actually. I've read another of hers, but I can't remember what it is.
I like that. I like that quote a lot.
Yeah, it's just, I like the ones that are a little more permissive and a little more like, hey, it's okay. You're not the first person to go through this. You won't be the last one, and there is a way out of it.
Not like Jerry Seinfeld.
With just just like this laziness, an excuse for laziness. And it's like, well, that might be a little reductive.
Like, I get it. It's a very Hollywood screenwriter mentality, because it's just like, look, just do it. What are you bitching about? We're in a town full of people whinging about it. Just do it. And the people who just do it are the ones who are going to succeed. Like, I get that. And sometimes that motivation works. So when I'm pissing and moaning in front of the keyboard, also just telling myself, Ali, just do it, also works. But I don't think you can live on that.
No.
That's a good way to string yourself up. And
it's also like when people say, oh, there's no such thing as depression, you're being lazy. It's like, well, you haven't experienced that, so you're reducing it to something that is...
That makes sense to you.
Just, that's... don't know, Jerry. Don't know.
Empathy at the end of the day, I think, is the key thing. You cannot speak for someone else's experience because you haven't lived that experience.
And empathy for yourself.
And empathy, yeah, exactly. That's a nice phrase. Empathy for yourself. Well, I forget who it is. Someone said, treat yourself as someone you really care, like you treat someone you really care about.
That's good.
Should be yourself, but. Anyway, I think that's going to be it for today, guys. I really got a lot out of that.
That was a fun one. I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
So I guess it's bye from all of us, and we'll see you on the next one.
So long.
Bye.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.